So, hello, Cedric. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Good. Yes, brilliant. Thank you for joining me. Um, so yeah, Cedric. So like as I say, thanks for joining me. So you're going to tell us, a little bit about what you do, if that's all right with you, and we'll just go from there. So, am I right in saying you are the founder of EDU Hustle?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so how did that come to be? Should we start there?
Yeah, for sure. So the story is I was actually traveling for work, and unfortunately ended up when I came home, found out that I had COVID.
Ah,
So yeah, I had to be quarantined away from my wife and son. So very unfortunate situation. Of course,
yeah.
being quarantined and in a hotel room away from them for 2 weeks. But one of the things I thought of was, well, how can I make this time, beneficial and worthwhile at least,
Hmm.
and being more of kind of, someone who thinks about, creativity and honestly just considering how we can provide solutions,
Yeah.
particularly in the area of education. I thought to myself, well, who needs the most support and help right now?
Okay.
And teachers popped in my head. Working in the education space as a teacher, school admin and things like that. I
Mhm.
saw firsthand, but then making the shift um, into, more of the education technology space, I was like, well, there's a lot of information and resources that could be shared
Yeah.
that I didn't necessarily see. So I was like, well, let me see what I can do. And from there, yeah, I started out just sharing different information online, started a community primarily
Yeah.
at that point through Facebook. And yeah, it was just kind of that was the launch point for it, where I saw that need, and
Mhm.
a lot of folks in my circle related to education, fellow teachers and colleagues, kind of also saw that there was some value there, and
Mhm.
I've been kind of just running with it ever since,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
offering that support wherever I can.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, am I right in saying that obviously, we live in different countries. I imagine things will be different in some areas, but I mean, over here, I can definitely I feel like obviously I'm speaking and generalizing here a little bit to a certain degree, but teachers over here, the time constraints that they're under, it just all the pressure, just the pressure in education seems to be overwhelming, especially over the last couple of years. COVID hasn't helped since we've been back, and there's obviously various, it's not just as easy as as to just say it in a 20-minute conversation. We could talk about it for hours and hours, obviously the depths in which it goes, but is it the same, is it the same over where you are? Is it quite, a similar situation?
Definitely, I think that's in a many cases, I think kind of universal,
Yeah.
is the kind of overwhelming feeling, and I mean, dare I say, burden, that I
Mhm.
think a lot of teachers feel, just considering, kind of where we are. And I mean, the pandemic was a whole nother, kind of shock to the system, but even
Yeah,
before that, it was
absolutely.
already, difficult enough, just even considering things like, relationships within school buildings,
Mhm.
with colleagues, even, with administration,
Yeah.
and those things can play, a huge role and factor, but then also just the brunt of the work itself. And then you consider compounded effects of all of the things that are expected of teachers
Mhm.
beyond teaching.
Yeah, yeah,
You become so many different things. So
yeah, of course. It's very, one of my really good friends, she's a teacher, and it's she's almost working at home just as much as she is in within the classroom. So there seems to be, yeah, a very very large expectation. Do you just sort of, obviously, for the namesake of the podcast, just talking about AI? Do you is it something you come across quite frequently in your sort of, in your uh, ed tech area, if you like?
definitely more, I would say more recently.
Mhm.
But I think honestly, when I look at it, I kind of view it, holistically on like a broader scale, and not even necessarily thinking about just in the education sector. But
Mhm.
we think about, things like the ATM machine or the
Mm,
automated checkout at the grocery store or the drugstore, whatever. So those things have already always kind of been in place. But I think when we're looking at education, we've also seen some of those pieces too. But they've been more so, I think, kind of pinpointed and reserved for like, gamification and
yeah.
that type of side of things. Whereas now I think it's becoming more and more prevalent in, just kind of like the day to day. So, there are groups now that I've seen on Facebook and other social platforms that are all about AI
Mm,
and, specifically for teachers, right?
yeah.
They're sharing different information, resources. How do we, create a lesson plan using this generative tool? So, and I see, even where I'm working now, within just the work that I'm doing, there's a
Mhm.
lot of opportunity, and I think people kind of understanding the use case for it in a lot of different facets, but definitely thinking about teaching and learning. I support a lot in like the homeschool space as well, so a lot of
Okay.
families are beginning to get understanding and kind of some
Mm,
grasp of how we can leverage and implement some of these tools to of course save time and be more efficient, and also just really get to kind of the core of sifting through an immense amount of information that you would
yeah.
have to otherwise kind of
Yeah.
figure out for yourself.
Absolutely. It seems like it's something, obviously the teacher in a a normal sort of classroom, I guess the teacher has to know. But
Yeah.
if you're taking that away, especially when it comes to, it's never something that I've actually thought about. It's never something that I've really spoken about. But the homeschooling situation, I imagine, I imagine it's probably very helpful
Yeah.
for that sort of thing. I mean, in your again, just in your area, in your experience over the last sort of, since, let's say, Chat GPT has blown up and OpenAI has become the huge, massive thing that it is today. Do you feel like there's starting to be less negative outlook on it, or do you feel like it's a bit of a
um
mix, or
I
what's
think
your sort of experience with that?
well, I think that there's less apprehension
Yeah. Okay.
regarding
Yeah. Brilliant
the
word. Great word. Yeah.
willingness to at least attempt and kind of look at what is there. um I think that there still does have kind of like that underlying sense of fear, because
Mhm.
I think it's like anything that we don't necessarily know. It's like the fear of the unknown type of
Yeah.
thing, where it's like, well, where is this going to go? Are robots going to take over?
Yeah. That's always
What-
the one, isn't it?
right, that whole thing, and then again, I try to think about it in really practical ways,
Mhm.
and just considering the potential of, well, where are these questions coming from, and do they have any bearing, right, to stand on,
Mhm.
right? Will AI replace teachers, right? That's a pretty
Mhm.
common one too.
Seems to be one of the biggest ones that I come across in
Yeah,
the on
for
the
sure.
social media platforms, is always
Yeah,
the big scary question.
right. But I think for folks like myself who've been kind of delving into that world and that space, I also kind of take somewhat of an accountability, to gain enough information and insight to be able to share. Maybe not
Yeah.
necessarily, try to sway with my opinion on things, but just say like,
Mhm.
well, this is what we know, right? This is, what we can basically kind of conclude at this point. And also, these are the benefits of it.
Mhm.
So I definitely do see that there are concerns and issues that
Of
are,
course.
very real. I always, talk about like, the use of data and
Yeah.
privacy, and when, of course, right now, and try not to scare anybody, but we're seeing the rise of a lot of these different tools and things that look really cool. Like,
Yeah.
you upload your face and it's this whole thing, or your voice. And,
Mhm.
but I've also, you know, seen instances and heard of, or, just even considered, well, down the line, like, what could this mean?
Yeah.
What if this gets into the wrong hands, right?
Mhm.
I've seen, even just to give a quick example, especially with a lot of the image creation and things like that. There was actually a deep fake image of a plane crash, that didn't actually happen here in the States,
Wow.
but it actually caused a drop in the U.S. stock market. And
Wow.
once it was found that this was a deep fake image, it rebounded. But you have to consider, well, what are the ramifications of things like that occurring?
Yeah.
And then also just even looking at more creatively, um, things like voice.
Mhm.
And, I don't know if anybody's familiar, but there's a bunch of AI music floating around, uh,
Yeah, yeah, it's
that isn't necessarily actually from that artist. It's just
mm,
the voice and tonality. And so those are the concerning aspects. But I think when we're talking about generative tools like, GPT and things like that, I think those things are more kind of solid in
mhm.
helping more than hurting in a lot of
Yeah.
instances.
I think there's as with everything, obviously it seems to just be on a bigger scale with this. I think I feel like we're almost reaching a point which I can't speak for history and the technological advances that the human race has ever made, but I imagine there's always been a point where we thought surely we can't get any further than this, and then this has popped up, and this seems to be, if it's as big as it's sort of been made out to be over the last 6 months, 6 to 12 months, it's huge, and there are always going to be negative impacts with it. I mean, I recently, just to sort of share stories of experiences and things that I've seen. There was a in the news over here about an author and somebody. Oh, I don't know how they've done it within the generative AI. They I imagine just put through all of her work, gave it a subject, and prompted it to the point where it wrote books in the exact same style as her, and then they've taken the books, put them online to sell under her name, and now they're getting sold, and they're actually attached to her work. So which, and she's tried to get them down, tried to get them taken down, but because she's not so much a big author, she's not been able to. So now that work is attached to her for until something happens, which is quite a wild one. I mean, you in your own sort of I think you were just touching on it a moment ago. Do you think that it does have more positives than it does negatives?
I think it could.
Mm,
Um, at this point, I think the one interesting thing to kind of consider, honestly, is um, look, for us, the kind of first and foremost is that I think education catches on to things a little bit later, and
mm,
then and I guess versus, we'll say, industry, right, business,
mhm.
because if you look at a lot of corporate structures and things like that, um, I feel like from what we've seen, a lot of those systems and the larger corporations and things, they've already been implementing these types of things, right?
Yeah.
They're the generative AI and all these automations and things like that they're not new in those spaces. They're newer when it comes to education.
Yeah.
Um, and also, that kind of plays into, of course, thinking about things like art, which is a whole nother thing, right? And the creative aspect. So I think the problem then comes in for us where there has to be a, a consideration for these areas because it's funny because I always think about, for teachers and for artists, I kind of liken them in somewhat of the same bucket,
Okay.
where they are always kind of I guess, professionals who are told to, like, oh, just do it for the love, right? Don't
Yes. Okay.
about,
Yeah.
but those are also I think the two main areas where things like this are called into question, right? So whenever we get to being able to take our ideas and turn them into something, because teaching to me is artistry as well. Then there's always that question of, well, is this right? Is this ethical?
Hmm.
Should you be able to create this image and sell it as an original piece of artwork online, or should you not? um, and to me, that's where things get cloudy, where you're talking about academia and you're talking about artistry. So for me, I just kind of look at it and say, well, the question then becomes, when we're looking at it as people,
Hmm.
right? Which do we value? Because I mean, if somebody's putting in, hours and hours on something, and I can generate it in, 30 seconds, then, for me, I'm like, there has to be something called into question at that point,
Yeah.
because what I've done to create this thing, or as a teacher, to get across, this message to this student versus what this generative tool can produce, in mere seconds. I just think that at that point, we have to then question, well, are we doing away with the necessity of human creativity?
Hmm.
Uh, so to me, it draws a lot of questions, but it does, I think, raise some concerns for me when we
Yeah,
start to talk about that, because the idea becomes then to your example of the author, you know, now what for that author, right?
yeah,
Do they continue on in that world of work that they've been, pursuing for that long?
yeah, yeah.
And somebody can just kind of rip off what they've been doing and you know, basically all their love and passion for something. Um,
Also the quality of it. If it
that
if the quality is the same, if it really does read like, for example, in that specific example, if it really does read like a book, or say we're talking about a photographer and it really does look like a beautifully set up picture, then that is a concern, isn't it? Is the how much is the human? Because right now, I mean, even with the photos, I don't know about you and how from your experiences and what you've seen, you may be more up on this than me as well in regards of what you've seen. But I feel like with the pictures, in a lot of cases, there is you can sort of feel something isn't quite right. Whether it's, like, I don't know, in some cases there's been an extra finger that you might not pick up on, or the skin's just a little bit waxy, or just there's something, it looks a little bit ghostly. But how long is it going to be until it can sort of give that human element? That I
yeah,
suppose that's a bit of a concern, isn't it? Um,
yeah.
is it something? Yeah, sorry, go on, carry
No, no, and I was just thinking, the one other kind of key component to that is that we see tools and companies, organizations that pop up, every single day, whose goal is basically to alleviate that problem that for one
on.
example that you just pointed out, right? Like,
Yeah,
oh, well, our solution is better than what's currently on the market because we don't have images with an extra finger, right?
yeah,
Like, oh, let's use this tool.
yeah, yeah.
Tool pops up, and it's like, well, it's kind of like this race to
Hmm.
wherever, right? Narnia, however.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's kind of the I think the thought and the kind of the workings of a lot of folks who are producing a lot of this, these resources that are, you know basically able to kind of replicate the more creative aspects of things, and there's kind of course, like as you mentioned, these subtle just
Hmm.
issues and things that don't
Yeah.
make sense or don't align, and then somebody else tries to, well, let's how do we
We'll
fix
figure
that,
it out. Yeah.
wrong with their code that we can implement into ours, and now
Mhm,
we have a great picture, and now you can produce whatever big name
mhm.
artist type of work, and at that point it's like, again, well, now what, right?
Yeah.
It was a really scary thing, and there's always a lot of question around, well, what's going to happen to jobs and industry and things like that. And
Mhm,
I recall, and I believe this was maybe back in 2017, 2016, maybe 2018 at the latest, probably, here in one of the states, in the US, that they actually had implemented, um, robotic arms that would flip burgers and drop fries, and put those into physical fast food locations. So you got to think, okay, well, clearly there's an impact, on
mhm.
that industry if they no longer are going to be hiring, high school students, or just
Yeah.
folks who need that work, to be able to do that. Then, like, well, what happens to them? Um,
Yeah. The economic impact, and there's a lot to it, isn't there? I obviously it was some months ago now. I believe it might have even been May, June, when Sam Altman sat in front of Congress, I believe, and sort of they were speaking, and trying to basically get the regulation out there for it. And obviously he's a massive part to play in the race, as we were saying. And it's just very interesting because as much as he's in many ways a genius, he simply, with his own words, said he can't predict the impact it's going to have on jobs. You'd hope it's a positive one. But I suppose only time will tell with that. Do you, in regards to that question, will it replace teachers? Just from our, the past experiences of speaking to teachers on the podcast in person and things like that, a lot of them really, really strongly believe that it will not. In because they don't believe that you can replicate that human element of things, and that you need that understanding. How do you feel about that in that regard?
It's funny. I recently posted something where I actually asked a
Okay.
one of the bots that I set up. I actually asked it, will AI replace teachers? So I was, I'm always curious, like, well, what does it
Yeah.
think? Um, but
Yeah, what does it think?
I'll
Yeah.
give my own thinking, and then I'll tell you kind of what that synopsis was. But
Yeah.
I would agree with those teachers. Just of course, having that experience, being in schools, of course, as a student myself, but then being a teacher and working, in
Mhm.
those buildings, boots on the ground, and knowing what that day to day kind of looks and feels like. But also just understanding the importance of human connection, and now, also being a father, my son is 3 years old, and
Mm.
just knowing the need, right, for that. And we saw,
Mhm.
in a lot of cases, issues and concerns related to the absence of that
Yeah.
whenever the pandemic hit, and everybody was home, and you know, you know,
Mm.
especially young children, like they had no
Mhm.
idea, like, well, what do we do, right? We can't be around people. There's, the social aspect of things where we can't, commune with other people. But then also with that, it's like you do have to have, that type of stance in relationships where you're engaging,
Mhm.
because there's going to be a lot of value there that, of course, you honestly you can't even get through a screen just as
No,
we're sitting in this.
absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Right.
Yeah.
But it even further, if you're talking to, a bot or something like that.
Mhm.
So in that regard and aspect, like, no, there's no replacement, for human engagement and
No.
relationship. You can't replicate that at all, right? Unless you just
No.
have another human.
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah.
in which case, even that interaction itself, because every human is intricate, in we're all individuals and different and
Yeah,
unique. So
absolutely.
that's different. But to kind of take it even to what, when I prompted AI and, the
Okay,
bot,
yeah.
and it basically said the same thing, right? It was
Wow.
like, it honestly told me, I was like, well, AI cannot necessarily, of course, replace that human element. However, what it can do is support teachers in making, their jobs and the things that they need to do, more efficient. Of course, we know with like lesson planning and, potentially even scoring, assessments and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But on top of that, it can essentially just kind of act as more of an assistant.
Mhm.
Um, and honestly, it was kind of interesting. What I got from that as well was that in summation, it was telling me AI can support and actually help enhance
Mhm.
the relational aspect between teacher and student, because it's going to take some of that, extensive additional work, and
Right.
time away from the teacher, that they would normally spend, kind of poring over things, to where it
Yeah.
allow them to, have 15, 20, 30, 60 minutes back, right, to be able to then, have more of that relationship. So
Yeah.
in that regard, yeah, I mean, I can see those things really
Mm.
happening. I mean, at what length and at what time?
Mhm.
But
Yeah, of course. That's a big question, isn't it? It's something that again is simply not going to get answered until we see it. Um, and how quickly that develops. I mean, that's really interesting, in regards to it helping. I suppose it's got so many impacts. Obviously that, yeah, like you say, the time that they will be able to spend with the students, the more a one-on-one sort of, more personal tuition, if you like. I mean, in regards to the actual individual, if it takes away the time, that will also reduce stress, which also means the overall mood might be better, which will have, can only really have a positive impact, can't it, in regards to the teaching side of
mhm.
things. Just sort of moving on, because I'm always just a little bit conscious of time. It's fantastic to hear your outlooks and everything. It's really interesting because it is very unique. Um, Do you what information, sorry, do you have just to tell the audience about your upcoming webinar, just so we can, we can get that out there. What are we to expect?
Oh, yeah. Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, actually, tomorrow, October 26th.
Okay, tomorrow.
Yeah, it is happening.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow. Right.
And
Okay.
I'm actually, I'm going to have probably some level of series to go along because I do have a bunch of ideas related, in a way, and it wasn't necessarily planned specifically to be, but
Okay.
it ideas kept formulating. So I'll share information for that. But yeah, so what I'm doing first is a webinar that focuses on leveraging AI for your career or education career, I should say, because it's more so focusing for folks in the education space. And it's kind of threefold, I think, in nature. First is basically more so just like intro to like what this even is,
Yeah.
focusing more primarily on just like the generative tools. So like, of course, GPT and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, so kind of getting to, what it is, but then also, basically how it can help. And I've seen it and, have implemented in a couple of different facets in my own kind of just supportive educators and even in my own, inner workings and things like that. Was you can, of course, if you're on any of these platforms, you probably can see, oh, well, this is how it can, write a resume or, come
Yeah.
with thing. But digging into that, I think a little bit more in depth and getting a little bit more practical with those things and
Okay.
really considering, well, and honestly talking, I would say somewhat to like where's the threshold of where you should probably actually seek a human professional versus
Okay.
having, this tool just, again,
Yeah.
create your whole resume and like just run with it.
Mhm.
So thinking about how it can support there, but then also one of the things that I found to be beneficial in understanding, how to kind of leverage AI is if you're not a teacher, and maybe you're not even a career, seeker or job seeker rather,
Mhm.
and let's say you land that job, I think that there are actually ways that you can infuse AI into your work stream that can make you more efficient, and then you can also, deploy some of those things and share them with like your colleagues in that space. I know that's one of the things I'm working on right now, is being able to share that with my team and say, well, this is
Mhm.
how this can actually make our work here, more efficient, right? And how we can leverage these things to get more things done and basically, support more in the education world. And then the final component of it is because for me, whenever I was leading professional learning or professional development for teachers at any point in my education career, my main goal was always to have folks be able to take at least one thing and be able to apply it in their classroom tomorrow, right? The very
Right.
following day. So I'm going to get practical with it. I
Yeah.
actually have one thing I mentioned before. Do have a bot set up for EDU HUSTLE, and the
Okay.
purpose of the bot is for it to respond and support um, kind of education, ed tech, career related questions. So I'm going to
Mhm.
dig into that. And then another component that goes with it for anyone who registers or even after the fact, because it's going to be recorded, so people can get access to the recording.
Okay.
Um, if you, basically purchase access to that, which is, I mean, it's $50. And
Mhm.
I try to make it very, simple, affordable stuff whenever
Yeah.
I do anything for sale. So I actually do have like an installment plan for anything
Mhm.
set up on my site too. But related to that, there's also going to be an ebook that I put together, which kind of breaks this down and chronicles a little bit, but it also offers 100 prompts that
Wow.
educators can use automatically, on at that point. So
Mhm.
within that particular document, of course, you click get access to the bot, and then
Fantastic.
from there you can copy and paste, any of those prompts and just start to have a conversation. I think what that also does is provides some support for, the engagement for educators with, these AI tools, but maybe they have never used,
Mhm.
ChatGPT or
Yeah, of
anything
course.
before. So it's like, well, this is how it works. And then my goal for that is really for people to just kind of take it and just run with it as
Yeah.
they and get comfortable with it. And, from there, that's just kind of a segue and launch point. But yeah, so
Mhm.
that's what you can expect. It's
Brilliant.
just, some diving into it and just really getting practical hands on with it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just the best way to learn. Have fun,
Yeah, great.
especially with that and the generative AI side of things. But yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Cedric. Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Do you have any sort of any words you'd like to say to the audience? If you want to plug your Twitter handle or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you. I appreciate you for doing this,
No
setting up the
problem. No worries.
Yes, and everybody, if anybody wants to connect with me, you can go to eduhustle.co. That's EDUHUSTLE.co. And it's at EduHustle on all social platforms.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Cedric.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye.